Hello friends, and welcome to today's book review. So I just finished this book, Lost, by James Patterson and James O'Born, and I wanted to record really quickly a video book review to accompany my usual written reviews. So first, I'll begin with a quick summary of this book. So we're following a Florida detective. His name is Tom Moon, or Detective Tom Moon, and he's a part of this task force that seems to have recently been assembled. And so within the first chapter, we're following him as he's chasing someone down in the Miami International Airport. And we quickly learn that this gentleman was trafficking children from Europe into the United States of America. The rest of the book follows the detective as he's trying to bring down the people that are responsible. There are some Russians, there are some Dutch people involved as well. So it's a very international book of sort. I should note that I've never read a James Patterson book before. I've read many books in this genre because it's a favorite genre of mine, but never anything specifically by him. But I did some research, and turns out he's quite the prolific author. So he's got a lot of books that were released just in this year. And this particular book was released in January of 2020. So it's been out for 5 months so far, and I had it on hold at my library and I just got a hold of it. There was a very, very long wait list for it. Next thing I want to get into are some of the important aspects of this book. So first, I'll talk about the biggest theme, and that to me was human trafficking. So the author gives us, the reader, a glimpse into the lives of children as they are being trafficked. And he does, I think, a pretty good job of this because he's giving us several children who are coming from very different places. So there are kids that are coming from, or there was a kid that came from Spain, and another that came from Kenya, and one that was from the Netherlands itself. And they all have very different origin stories that somehow led to them being a part of this group of children that were being trafficked into the United States. I think the main point that he was trying to drive home is the fact that human trafficking is a problem here in the United States that isn't taken as seriously, or not that it's not taken as seriously, but it's not as prioritized as other crimes such as terrorism, for example. The biggest challenge that the main character, Detective Moon, had in this book was trying to convince his co-workers and other law enforcement that what he was trying to do, bring down these child trafficking rings, was actually worth their time and their resources. And I think maybe a lot of us consider child trafficking as a problem that is them. It's over there. It's not something that impacts us here in the US. And this book, or one of the things I think the author was trying to drive home, is that no, it actually is a problem here in the United States. Did I like the way that the author handled this theme? I think yes. I think he did a good job. He was never insensitive, but there was a clear point he was trying to get across, and he got that point across. I got the point of what he was trying to say, which is, we should take this issue more seriously, and it is a problem here in our home country. Now the characters. So there are many characters in this book. I mentioned the children already, and they were ranging in age from, I can't remember, I think the youngest was about 6, all the way to, there was a teenager in the group as well. He was really funny. And some of them didn't speak English, some of them did. So the kids, I think, were a really important part of this book. I really enjoyed reading and following them. And they weren't, the kids, although they weren't the main set of characters in the book, they played a pretty important role. And I think they were well written. It's sometimes hard for adult writers to write children well. I think probably the best at that might be Stephen King. He does such a fantastic job writing children, but these children were pretty well written as well. The main character, Detective Moon, he was a pretty likable character. You could tell he got along well with others, and he was the good guy in this book. He was trying to do good or do well by these kids that had been so wronged. And he was trying to stop something, and you could see, or you could feel the emotion in this character as we are following his adventures in taking down these bad guys. Pairing with that main character, Detective Moon, was another detective. Her name was Marie. She was from the Netherlands, so she was the point person for Detective Moon when he traveled over there. And there was a little something brewing between those two that was really nice to read. He made her a very strong-willed character that had a lot of integrity as well, and she was a lot of fun to follow too. For that reason, I love characters like that. And there were a few other characters interspersed in the book. So there was the family of the detective, and then there were the bad guys. So there were two sets of bad guys in this book. The Russians, and then another set that were Dutch. So he made one set of the bad guys just bad, just no redeeming qualities whatsoever. You wanted to see them come down, and you wanted to see them come down hard. And then the other set of the bad guys, towards the end, there was more nuance to them. He humanized them a little bit more, particularly because one of them, the woman, was a mom, so she had a daughter. And so towards the end, there are events that happen that I'm not going to get into for fear of spoilers. The main character also addressed this, how I felt, which was that I didn't expect to feel that way about the bad gal character. But in the end, you kind of end up feeling for her just a little bit. She still did a lot of bad. Still happy to see that she was taken care of in whatever manner that was. On to the highlights. So I'm going to go through and find some of the highlights. My top 5 highlights are what I like to do. This was a very quotable book because actually the main character in this book was a philosophy major. So he was known to have a quote for every situation. So there are actually a lot of quotes in this book. They aren't his, they're from famous philosophers. And he just kind of throws them in whenever a situation calls for them. And I highlighted some of those, and then some were just part of the book. Okay, so one of the highlights that I think is really important to the whole message of this book, it's about a very short paragraph, and I'll read the whole thing. So it says, in the United States, the media doesn't care much about gang violence in places like Chicago and Miami until a bystander is killed. But the subsequent outrage rarely lasts long enough to galvanize the public into helping the police. I thought of all the things this young woman might have done with her life. She might have had children eventually. A death like this can ripple through eternity. And this was the main character speaking on the death of a young woman. And so I think this really drives the point that the author is trying to make, which is even just one death resulting from these terrible situations can be so impactful, and really trying to get the emotional response out of the reader because of that. Here's the other one that I liked. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I think one of the other themes that he was really getting on was seeing the world from a cop's perspective. So here's the highlight. It's easy for a cop to pretend he's seen it all and nothing bothers him. The reality is that if you see too much, there's nothing anyone can do to save you. So on the job, I never minimized the tragedy I saw. It kept me human, connected. I embraced the fact that I could still be shocked. And there were many other parts in the book where he's kind of playing up the perspective of the police that maybe the public isn't aware of or less sympathetic with. And I thought that was pretty good. We see a lot of this on the news quite often where police are getting in trouble for things like using excessive force, and maybe we don't always get insight into the things that they deal with on a regular basis. And then one more, let's see. Oh, here's a funny one. So he was getting called to his supervisor's office, and this was in dialogue with another character, and he says this: that gave me the courage I needed to march into the supervisor's office. Still, I felt like I was walking the Green Mile. And if you've read The Green Mile by Stephen King, then you would understand why I liked this quote. I read that book, loved it. It was actually one of the books I read this year. Fantastic book, would highly recommend it. So it was nice to see that reference in here. And here's one last one. And it's about philosophy. So like I said, the main character was a philosophy major, so he had a lot of little nuggets to sprinkle in throughout this book. So this is one of them. Philosophy came down to opinions. It wasn't science. It was one man's or one woman's idea of what life should be. So far, I hadn't found any answers that would solve all my problems. I'd read what Plato and Schopenhauer, I think I'm mispronouncing that, and various other philosophers had said about adversity, but it was former President Bill Clinton who'd said it best. If you live long enough, you'll make mistakes. But if you learn from them, you'll be a better person. It's how you handle adversity, not how it affects you. The main thing is never quit, never quit, never quit. And that's just a really nice piece of life advice. And he mentions that it kept him going in police work and in sports and all of that jazz. All right, time for the conclusion. So overall, I thought this was a good book. I enjoyed it. It was actually very short. I finished it in one afternoon. I believe it was about 4 hours reading time, maybe a little bit more. But it was entertaining, it was engrossing. It did a good job of handling a pretty sensitive topic and also really encouraged me to educate myself more on that particular topic, which I always like to take away even when I'm reading a fiction book. Overall, I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. If you like this video, then please hit the like button and also feel free to subscribe. So I'm planning to upload more book reviews and also just, learning stuff in general, something that I like to do. And it's what I hope to center this channel on. So if you want to join me on that journey, then feel free to subscribe. And I look forward to growing and learning with the community that we're able to create here.